morning, everyone. My name is Soha Amber, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to NEIU's International Business Conference for 2025. I'm the Vice President of the College of Business and Technology Student Advisory Council. Today, we are honored to invite thought leaders, innovators, and change makers to this annual conference to engage in thought-provoking discussions and exploring and navigating the supply chain industry with a focus on Asian perspectives. We encourage our students to seize this opportunity to network, exchange ideas, and expand their knowledge beyond the classroom. I would like to take a moment to thank our speakers, particularly our keynote speaker for today, Ms. Rosemary Coates, for graciously accepting our invitation to present today at IBC 2025. Some thanks are in order. I want to appreciate and acknowledge the people who have made today successful, who have made today happen. Starting off with our dean, who's not here today, Dr. Michael Bedell, and our faculty advisor, Dr. Tang Ku, Vladimir Fernandez, our staff advisor, the staff at the CBT Dean's Office, Jocelyn Rubeck. Can you please give a round of applause for her? President of the CBT Student Advisory Council, my team members, Jose Colon and Suzanne Polikoski in the CBT Student Advisory Council, and obviously all of our student leaders and volunteers today, in particular, Shalom, Rakesh, Siddhi, Venika, Khushi, Lafe, Mayur, Prajwal, Mary Cruz, and Divi. Once again, welcome to IBC 2025. We have an exciting day planned ahead. I would like to invite Dr. Chume Jane Sher, Associate Dean of the College of Business and Technology, to share opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. As you might have noticed, typically the dean will make the open remarks, but today he graciously let me to have the honor to do that. Someone will say, this is a great sign of trust. Others will say, maybe that's a test. No matter what, I'll try my best to make him not regret it. Okay, welcome to the International Business Conference hosted by the College of Business and Technology at Northeastern. And this conference, its mission is simple but powerful: to equip our students with knowledge and experience that make you successful in global business. And the legacy of this conference dates back in 2002, when one of our students, Lucas Dabrowski, started the vision to create a platform for connecting students and sharing ideas about global business. And this conference has continued to thrive with the great work of our faculty, students, and staff. With that being said, I would like to take this opportunity to give a huge shout out to our faculty advisor for this conference, Dr. Tang Chu, and our student development director, Mr. Vlad Flanders, and our student leader, Jocelyn Rubeck, along with all our student leaders in College Student Advisory Council. Thank you so much. It's your hard work makes this event possible. Again, if we look at the PowerPoint slide, it shows the conference theme, right? Changing global or Asian, especially Asian supply chain. This is a timely and critical aspect of global business. We are going to have an extensive and exciting program. Topics include, well, let me make sure I get everything right, reshoring strategies. Topics such as evolving trading policies, and topics like AI and supply chain. We are also going to cover how to become a super communicator. And also, we have great alumni join us to discuss all those topics. So it's exciting and it might be exhausting. Don't worry, we're going to have lots of coffee breaks. With that being said, it's my honor to introduce our interim provost and vice president of academic affairs, Dr. Shane Cofer.
Good morning. As she said, my name is Shane Cofer. I'm interim provost and vice president for academic affairs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Northeastern and to the 23rd Annual International Business Conference. So I too would like to take a moment to thank and recognize our College of Business and Technology for hosting this event, as well as the planning committee, including students and faculty, for organizing this great conference. Let's give them a hand. Also, I'd like to thank in advance the industry leaders and guest speakers who are here to share their expertise with us today. Let's give them a hand. So, as you know, the theme of the conference is navigating the Asian supply chain, opportunities and challenges. This is such an important and timely topic as we work to understand global business, particularly the role of Asian markets in today's economy. This topic also aligns nicely with the NEIU's commitment to fostering global perspectives in business education. So today I'd like to encourage all of our students to take full advantage of the networking opportunities that you have at this conference. There are many professional and industry leaders here among us, so don't be shy. The value of learning from experts who bring real-world experience cannot be underestimated. The insights shared today will help students and faculty better understand international business dynamics in a shifting environment. So we have an exciting agenda for you today, so please actively participate, ask many questions, and make the most of the opportunities that the conference provides. I hope you enjoy your day and welcome to Northeastern Illinois University. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jose Colon, and I'm the Secretary of the Student Advisory Council at NEIU's College of Business and Technology. Thank you all for being here. It is my pleasure to introduce Rosemary Coates, the Executive Director of the Reshoring Institute and the President of the BlueSick Consulting. With over 35 years of experience in global supply chains, she has advised 80+ companies, authored 5 best-selling books, and serves as an expert witness in supply chain disputes. Today, she will share insights on how global companies are adapting to changing Asian supply chains. Please join me in welcoming Rosemary Coates.
Morning, everybody. Welcome. All right, we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about what's happening in global supply chains, what companies are doing now, what companies aren't doing now, and the integration of Asian supply chains into the world, because you can't really talk about Asian supply chains unless you talk about the whole world. We're an completely integrated supply chain around the world these days, so we're going to talk about some of that. All right, here we go. Just a little bit more about me. I never miss an opportunity to advertise my books. Those are the 5 books that I've written along the bottom. The first one in the red was 42 Rules for Sourcing and Manufacturing in China. Anybody know what 42 has to do with? No? Okay. It was a famous movie. And in the movie, the people were on a quest to find out what the answer was. And eventually it's kind of a pop culture movie. And the answer was 42. Just didn't make any sense. But anyway, my publisher picked that as a title for the books. So that book was written in 2009. It's kind of aging, but somehow people are still buying it. I don't know. And then the one on your far right is Legal Blacksmith, which I wrote together with an attorney. So I do a lot of expert witness work. I get involved in these big global supply chain conflicts. And a couple of years ago, one of the attorneys I was working with said, let's write a book together. So I'm like, okay, attorneys write in a completely different style than business writing. But we managed to crank it out and put together a book that I think is a very good reference book. I wrote the first part of every chapter on the functions within supply chain, and she wrote the last half of each chapter on the legal ramifications. So what kind of clauses and so forth should go into contracts, and how to avoid or how to stay out of court when you have a supply chain dispute. So that's a pretty good reference model. Okay. So I've been running the Reshoring Institute. We founded it about 10 years ago, 11 years now, I guess. And also have my own consulting firm. So I still do global supply chain consulting and then expert witness work as well. So that's how I earn a living. The Reshoring Institute. Oh, a couple of other things. So I have a podcast that's called The Frictionless Supply Chain, and it's focused on women leaders in supply chain management. And then I also write for Supply Chain Management Review magazine. So I have a monthly column in the magazine. The Reshoring Institute is a nonprofit organization and nonpartisan organization. So we don't take sides. We try to report objectively on what's happening in the environment. And we have a dual mission. The first is to educate the public and to assist our clients with projects that they're working on in reshoring, about reshoring, and helping them with strategy. And then the other half of our mission is to teach graduate student interns, primarily MBAs and masters in engineering, about the world of manufacturing. And that's because there hasn't been much education about manufacturing for many years, as most manufacturing was moved offshore in the early 2000s, mostly to China. We lost a lot of that expertise in the US and the teaching as well around the topics of manufacturing. So we took it on ourselves as part of our mission to teach and to educate students and the public about what's happening in the manufacturing world. So in the 1990s and early 2000s, offshoring to China was the economic strategy of most US manufacturers. This is a picture of the Forbidden City in Beijing. Anybody been to Beijing? Okay, few people. It's right in the center of Beijing is the Forbidden City. And that's where the emperors and empresses lived for 500 years. It was walled off and closed to the public. So no one was allowed in except government officials, and they were only allowed in during the day. At night, no one was allowed into the Forbidden City. And so it has quite a history, really interesting. If you are interested in learning about it, there are many, many good books and fiction and nonfiction about what happened within the Forbidden City. It was a kind of a really interesting culture, lots of women and concubines and emperors and all kinds of stuff that went on within the city. But when you go to Beijing now, it's a museum. There are 999 rooms, and that's on purpose because 10,000 is the number of the emperor. So anything on earth has to be less than the number of the emperor. So there are 999 rooms, and you can go through and visit them. It's quite a large property. Okay, so I've been a management consultant for a long time, and in the late 90s and early 2000s, the strategy of all these companies was to offshore to China. And so I was helping them. I made a lot of progress in terms of helping companies shift their manufacturing into China. We set up factories there, we installed systems, we found sources, we did a lot of work in China, and it closed a lot of factories in the US behind us. So there were a lot of layoffs, factory closings, and so forth. And I gotta tell you, after a while, it started to get to me. I could see that people were losing their jobs, and it was just, it was really starting to work on me. So, but it was very important strategy, and it's what my clients wanted. So I helped all these companies offshore. This is a picture of a factory outside of Beijing, outside of the 5th Ring Road. So if you go to Beijing, there are ring roads around the city, and they get sequentially further and further out. So this was the 5th Ring Road, about an hour and a half, 2 hours from the center of Beijing. It's an enormous city, as you could imagine. And I was working for an automotive client in Beijing. And one morning I came to work and the purchasing manager said, we're going to go see a factory. You want to come with us? I'm like, of course. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to visit factories in China. And so we drove out the 5th Ring Road and went to this factory. So we came up to the factory door and the manager met us at the door and he said he had to take a conference call and he'd be back in about 15 minutes. So just go ahead and walk around and he'd be back. He'd catch up with us. Now, if you've ever been in a factory, you know you are never, never allowed to go walk around unescorted. But in China, it was just fine. So we started walking down the center aisle, you can see there. And I'm, first of all, astounded that they let us do this. Secondly, we had no hard hats, no protective goggles, no toe protection. These are all things that you would be expected to be wearing in a manufacturing environment like this, especially a machine shop. And the first thing I noticed is the guy in the blue on your bottom right there. I don't have a pointer, I don't think, or do I? Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, the guy in the blue, and he's operating a machine that's cutting metal. And he had no lead apron, which you would expect. He had no goggles, no gloves, nothing, no protection for his body while he's cutting these metal parts. You would never see that in the US or in Western Europe. That's just a big safety violation. Whoops, go back there. There we go. That's just a huge safety violation. So, you know, I'm looking at all this stuff. I've been in dozens and dozens of factories around the world, and I was sort of astonished. Now, the people, my client, the people I was with from the purchasing department, told me that this is one of their very best suppliers in China. They were making high quality automotive parts. They were very happy with the results of what they were buying, and they were about to award them a very large contract. And that was the reason we were there that day. So as we're walking down this factory, it was partially owned by the Chinese government and partially privately owned. And I'm thinking, holy cow, you know, this is really a safety nightmare. So we got about halfway down. You can see the people in the center aisle. Those are my colleagues from my client. And they're talking to one of the machine operators about a specific part. So we got about halfway down and I'm thinking, it's too dangerous for me to be here. There was metal flying and smelled bad. And so I backed up and asked if it was okay if I took pictures. So if you've ever been in a factory, that's a no-no. You're not allowed to ever take pictures inside a factory because it's a company's IP, what they're making, how they're making it, and so forth. And so you have to usually check your phone at the door. You're not allowed to take your phone in the factory. But they said, sure, go ahead and take pictures. So I'm like really excited because I never get to take pictures in a factory. So I went up to the mezzanine and started taking pictures. And eventually the manager came back and we had our little meeting and so forth. The reason why I show you this picture, though, is that in the early 90s, it wasn't just a matter of low wages. In fact, the guy in the blue there was making $3.63 an hour in US dollars. In the same job, we did a study at the Reshoring Institute, and the same job in the US paid $26.10 an hour. So $3.63, $26.10, and in Europe, $32 and change. So very low wages at the time. Now, not so much anymore, but at the time, these were wages that were a tenth of what it would cost in the US. But also, because of the lack of enforcement of safety regulations, the low cost operation was always a factor, right? So we've got low wages and we've got a low cost of operations. And the combination of the two made it very, very attractive for US manufacturers and European manufacturers to offshore their manufacturing to China. It was just the economics of the situation. It was cheap, right? And you could really, cut your operating costs by a half or more if you moved to China. So that's what companies were doing. They were making economic decisions to move overseas. Okay, so fast forward to 2012, the presidential election, back before the crazy days of our elections. A little crazy right now. But back then, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama were both China bashing, saying it was all China's fault, all these economic woes we were going through, all the problems with the economy, it was all because of China. And so here I am helping all these companies offshore, and I'm thinking, oh man, I can't tell anybody what I do for a living. This is really awful. I'm embarrassed, right? Plus, I was starting to feel uncomfortable about helping companies do this and closing the factories in the US. So as a result of that, we started talking to our clients about potential changes in the strategy. That is, moving forward, thinking about potentially moving your production out of China and to somewhere else. So we put together a methodology, and that's when we started also the Reshoring Institute. So we've been around for a while, like 10 or 11 years. This is not a new concept. Reshoring has been around for quite some time. Okay, so over the past 10 or 15 years, a lot of really major things have happened in global supply chains. When I started out working 40 years ago, it was all about manufacturing in the US and then shipping things overseas to an international spot. It was kind of a dark hole. You had to ship something to a customer somewhere. You didn't know much about them or where they were. There was no internet at the time. I mean, it seems unbelievable, doesn't it? There was no email. There was no way of looking up the company's background. You had to rely on global networks of the Department of Commerce, it was, really a lot of unknowns at the time. But fast forward over the period of 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, and what we have now are long international supply chains. So these are supply chains that we can now have visibility. We can see all the supply chain partners. We can see where to source. We can find out about the company that's buying from us or we're buying from them. There's a lot more information sharing and stuff going on. So this developed over that period of time. And essentially, the result was a globalization of these companies. A few other things have gone on during this period that create risk in supply chains, like counterfeiting, global counterfeiting. 20% of what you buy on Amazon is counterfeit. Wow, does that surprise you? It surprised me when I found that out too. As I mentioned, I do expert witness work, and I've worked on a number of counterfeit and gray market cases that involve companies primarily in China, but also around the world, that are producing counterfeit products for sale, especially on e-commerce platforms like Amazon and eBay. eBay is really one of the worst offenders. They have lots and lots of counterfeit stuff that is resold on eBay. So counterfeiting has become a problem. It affects the economics of a company that's got the real brand or the real product, who cannot now make money, whose reputation may be damaged by a counterfeit product. There's all kinds of implications economically for counterfeits. Geopolitics, of course, really different. If you lived through last week, you know how in a matter of 10 minutes, the whole world politics can change. So the press conference between Trump and Zelensky on Friday afternoon has shifted the geopolitics of the world in 10 minutes. I mean, it was really quite amazing. I was in Paris last week, and we had just come back to the hotel I turned on CNN. It was the beginning of that news conference, and my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And then the French started on their news network really trashing what was going on. I mean, really saying that America had betrayed Europe. There's a lot of ramifications. So these kind of instances with geopolitics are going to change the commerce and the supply chain as a result. Our relationship is very important and dependent on what's going on in the world with respect to supply chains. The trade wars started by the first Trump administration, putting tariffs on Chinese imports, and then aluminum and steel imports for various countries, started a war, and it's usually tit for tat. And by that, I mean, when we put tariffs on another country, they put respondent tariffs on us. So our exporters now are subject to tariffs importing into places like China, as well as our importers in the United States are subject to tariffs, making the cost of goods to buy products more expensive. Okay, everybody understand what tariffs do? They put a tax on anything coming into the US. And originally the intent of that kind of tariff was to make it more competitive for the domestic environment. So if I've got to manufacture some goods, some widgets, say for example, and I can manufacture in the US for $100 per widget, but the imports from China are only $75, it makes sense to buy that stuff from China until you introduce tariffs. And once you introduce a 25% tariff, then that product coming in at $75 has a tariff of $25, and it makes the cost of that good $100. So it competes with, on the same level, a US manufactured good. So the intention was to protect US businesses by making imports look more expensive, right? But meanwhile, as companies that were importing products and parts now have to pay more for those imports, and what do they do with that extra money? I mean, they have to pay extra money, 25%. What happens to it? It either gets absorbed into the company's cost structure or it gets passed on to you, the consumer. And in most cases, companies are passing on that cost. So that makes the cost of goods that we're buying in the US more expensive. Okay, follow me, everybody? Understand? Okay, all right. So starting a trade war, we say, okay, 25% on products coming to the US. And China says, okay, so you're charging 25% on incoming electronics and auto parts and so forth. We're going to put a 25% tariff on agricultural parts coming from the US, agricultural goods. So all those farmers in Iowa and Illinois and Minnesota and Wisconsin that are shipping goods overseas to China now find that their cost is not competitive. And China says, our people aren't going to buy this stuff. It's too expensive, right? So it hurts the farmers in the US. All right, so in 2018, the tariffs were mostly on China. Okay, so they imposed tariffs not on everything, but nearly everything coming from China. And then aluminum and steel, the 232 tariffs were on aluminum and steel coming from multiple countries around the world. Today, if you look right across, the 2024 tariffs that were announced in 2025 are on multiple countries. So you already have a 25% tariff on incoming parts from China. There was an additional 10% that's already been placed on products coming from China. So now China, most of the products coming from China are at least 35% more expensive than they were without the tariff wars. Canada and Mexico have been threatened with 25% tariffs. And they were originally paused, but they're supposed to go into effect tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow, 25%, making goods coming from Mexico and Canada 25% more expensive tomorrow. Now, I understand there was some news this morning, there may be another pause and renegotiation maybe of those tariffs, who knows? And then the rest of the world, the Trump administration has threatened 10% or 15% on goods coming from any place else in the world. So what we see happening is that we're excluding the rest of the world by making it more expensive for them to sell into the US, charging those tariffs. And meanwhile, consumers, us, are the ones that are going to pay for it. Okay, other countries don't. It's us, because we're taking those imports in now at a higher cost. The company that's importing is going to pass that cost on to the consumers. So stay tuned, watch the news tonight and see what happens with respect to the tariffs that are supposed to go into effect tomorrow. And I'm going to talk some more about Mexico in a minute. Okay, let's go on. I want to tell you about the Uyghurs. Anybody ever heard of the Uyghurs? Okay, a little smattering here and there. So the Uyghurs are an ethnic group, minority group in China, in the far western provinces of China. They're mostly Muslims, and they're more, I would say, Middle Eastern than they are Chinese in terms of their culture and the way they look and so forth. Well, but they've been part of China for quite some time. And so China has decided they wanted to assimilate the Uyghurs into the Chinese culture. So what they've done is put the Uyghurs in the Zhejiang province in far western China in essentially concentration camps. And they're put into these camps to re-educate them into the Chinese way of doing business. Okay, so they're essentially forced labor. They're put to work in these camps and they're making all kinds of different products in the camps. So the US government, US Customs, I'm also a licensed customs broker, so I get involved in a lot of importing stuff. And the US government in the 1920s, so almost 100 years ago, established a non-forced labor law for imports coming into the US. And so that law says that you cannot, it is illegal to import any products that are made by forced labor or prison labor or child labor. Okay, so here are the Uyghurs. They're forced into essentially prison camps in Zhejiang province, and they're making all kinds of stuff that we would recognize. It's the largest area, the largest producer of remote controls for TVs. Surprise, who would have thought, right? Cotton that's made into textiles that are made into clothing that we're importing. They import other electronics, or they make other electronics in these prison farms, all kinds of stuff. So US government says, nope, can't import anything that's made in Zhejiang province. You are guilty until you prove to me that the goods do not include Uyghur labor. Now, the other thing is the Uyghurs are often bused to factories in the eastern seaboard of China. And if we find out that some product that's coming from any one of those factories into the US, it is excluded from being imported. Okay, so US Customs is fairly sophisticated in their information. They can figure out where these products are coming from. They do DNA testing on apparel that comes into the US to make sure it does not include cotton from Zhejiang province, right? I mean, it's pretty sophisticated in terms of what they can do and what they know. So the cotton is grown in Zhejiang. It's sent to textile factories in China that produce the fabric. The fabric then goes to an apparel company or a sewing shop for making into, say, men's shirts. and then the shirts are imported into the US. US Customs tests them to see if they include cotton from Zhejiang province. And if it does, they are not allowed into the US. Big deal in the apparel and footwear industry. Big, big, big deal. So you might not hear so much about it, but the people that run the big apparel companies around the world are very, very sophisticated and understand how much this impacts their worldwide operations. Okay, so tariffs have now become a weapon in geopolitics, right? So before it was to protect domestic production, but in the last few years is now becoming a negotiating weapon. So you've heard the Trump administration say that they want Mexico, for example, to address the cartel issues and immigration issues. And if they don't, they're going to apply a tariff. So it's no longer related to just protecting the US industry against cheaper foreign imports. Now it's being used as a weapon to force other countries to do different things. So there's been a shift in the application of those tariffs. And you can see some of them here. What's coming next? 100% on electric vehicles, 50% on semiconductors. Holy cow, semiconductors. Do you know where semiconductors are used? Everywhere, right? There's one in your phone. There's one in your blender at home. There are many in your car. They're everywhere. And by restricting or making them more expensive, you're going to make the products more expensive or more difficult to find. Okay, all kinds of things. Solar cells, ship-to-shore cranes, medical supplies. That's a big one, medical supplies. Why would we want to put a tariff and make it more expensive for medical supplies? I mean, there are some things here that don't make sense. Okay, so there's the big application is on China, but also Canada. The Trump administration has threatened Canada 25% tariffs beginning tomorrow, unless they back down. Mexico forcing immigration and addressing cartel issues, particularly fentanyl imports. And then the rest of the world, a general tariff on goods coming in from everywhere. So what's happening is we see a lot of companies that are moving out of China and into other areas. Now, we hope that a lot of those companies will bring manufacturing back to the US. And you can make an economic case for it in many instances that it is equally as economically approachable coming into the US or manufacturing in the US as it is in foreign locations. You can make a case for that in a lot of industries, but in a lot you can't. So if you have a product that's made with a lot of labor, for example, then you're likely looking at someplace else out of China, like Vietnam or Taiwan or Thailand or Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore sometimes, other places, India, other places where you have a low-cost labor force, or bringing back to the US, or bringing back to Mexico. Now, the reason why Mexico is important is because the labor costs are really inexpensive in Mexico. In fact, central Mexico has some of the lowest labor costs in the world, even lower than places like Vietnam and Indonesia. So Mexico looks like a really good opportunity. Low-cost labor, low-cost operations, proximity to the North American markets, all kinds of reasons. They have fairly sophisticated manufacturing as well. Although their infrastructure isn't great yet, and integration of vertical supply chains isn't super yet, but it's coming, certainly causing a lot of companies to move out of China and into Mexico. The impact of Ukraine, I mean, we saw the news on Friday, but essentially Ukraine's on the other half of the world. So how important is it really to our day-to-day lives? Well, Ukraine makes a lot of raw materials. There's a lot of mining and rare earths. You've probably heard about rare earth elements. Those are used in making of all electronics. You need all these rare earth elements. For example, neon gas. So Ukraine supplies about 45% of the world's neon gas. And neon gas is used in the etching process of semiconductors. So when you're making a semiconductor, the pattern is etched on the substrate, and then the components are put on top of it and so forth. So it's required. You have to have neon gas to make semiconductors. So what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine? Some of the first factories they bombed were neon factories. So all of a sudden, there's a global shortage of neon gas. And as you may recall, a couple of years ago, there was a big semiconductor shortage. Guess what? That was partially because of this shortage from Ukraine on neon gas, and partially to do with what happened after the pandemic and demand with respect to semiconductors. But even though Ukraine is halfway around the world, it's important in providing raw materials for manufacturing everywhere is significant. Okay, so what products are subject to reshoring or should be reshored? The first thing that we do with our clients is we look at the cost structure of the product. So we look at a product and say, how much of your product is related to labor? And how much is just raw materials? If there's a high labor content, then you're likely looking for a low-cost labor environment in some other country. If there's low labor and you have more automation and there isn't much labor involved, you have lots of options of where you could go in the world. So the example that I like is if you are making apparel, say you're sewing men's shirts in a factory, you need a lot of people sitting at sewing machines to do that, right? Lots of labor involved. Or if you're assembling iPhones, you have lots of labor, people sitting at stations assembling iPhones, assembling electronics. But if you're making textiles, so see the picture in the middle there, that's a textile factory. If you're making textiles that are going into that shirt, it's fully automated. If you go to a textile factory, there's nobody there except a few engineers walking around managing the machinery. So you've got a sewing shop with lots of labor versus a textile factory that's fully automated. If you need a lot of labor, then you should be looking for a low-cost country, and that's not the US. Our costs of labor are very high. But if you have an automated factory, if you're making textiles, there are lots of places in the US that make sense, like the Carolinas, Mississippi, Alabama, Northern Florida. These are places where the labor cost is relatively low, and because you don't need much labor, the environment is less expensive, so potentially you could bring back manufacturing to those places. So the first thing to do is to understand the cost structure of your product. And then that will guide the decision of where you look for a manufacturing site. A couple of years ago, we did a study at the Reshoring Institute of average salaries for production workers around the world. So we looked at, I think, 12 countries and in 10 job categories. So we took, like, in this case, machine operators, and we looked at the cost of machine operators in 12 countries. Okay, so can you see where China is? Right in the middle. Used to be China was a really low-cost environment, but over the past 10 years or so, the labor costs have risen significantly in China. So it cannot be considered any longer a low-cost production environment. It's right in the middle. So who are the low-cost countries? In our study, and there are many of them around the world, but in our particular study, we looked at Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Those are on the low end of potential production environments. So we compared this in 10 different job categories, and this is what we found over and over again. The cost of producing in China has gone way up, still way below the US. Look where the US is in the green bar. So the cost of labor in China is still less than half of what it would be in the US or in Europe, but much higher than it is in some of the low-cost countries. So this, again, is going to drive some of your decision in terms of where to put a factory. So most companies now are rethinking their global supply chains. What do we do? Costs have gone up in China. There's all this tariff stuff going on. There's geopolitics. What are we going to do? And so it used to be in the past, in the early 2000s, when I was helping companies offshore to China, the analysis was pretty easy. I mean, we'd say, look how cheap it is. You know, we do it based on a cost analysis. These days, it's much more complicated. And I swear the supply chain people have gotten way smarter in the past 10 years. And so has the leadership in most manufacturing companies, who no longer are looking just at costs, but understanding that there are so many other issues. So what most companies are doing is considering reshoring back to the US, nearshoring, which would be Mexico or Central America, even Canada, China plus one strategy. So keeping some manufacturing in China to serve the China market or the Asian market, plus one other country. So China plus Mexico, for example, China plus the US, China plus two strategy. We're going to manufacture some things in China, keep some products there, bring some back to the US, put some in Mexico. Right? So these are really different strategies from what we saw even 20 years ago. Lots of companies are trying to do domestic sourcing now, or they're building inventory to avoid a lot of the risk that we've seen since the pandemic. Certainly the pandemic introduced risk in a way that we had never seen before. And now all of a sudden companies say, I get it, you know, these long global supply chains have lots of risk involved. Every time a product changes hands in the supply chain, so it goes from the manufacturer to the trucker to the port, at the port, loaded onto a ship, the ship on the ocean, at destination, customs clearance, trucking to destination, warehousing. Every time those goods change physical location or change handlers, you have a point of risk. Back in the day when I started, we did domestic sourcing, bought everything from other suppliers in the US, and none of that risk was there. Today, risk is a super important part of supply chains everywhere. Okay, we talked about Mexico a little bit. A lot of companies are trying to move to Mexico from China to start producing in Mexico. This is a picture of San Diego, the Otay Mesa border crossing. So I flew down there last year with one of our interns to have a look around at the Otay Mesa area. So Otay Mesa is about 20 miles east of San Diego, but it's all part of the San Diego import port. And in this case, Otay Mesa is strictly commercial imports. So you can't walk across the border there. You can't drive across in your personal automobile. It's strictly for trucks and rail. That's it. And they built that port on purpose to relieve the cross-border traffic in Tijuana, which got, you know, I mean, even today, if you drive across the border in Tijuana, it'll take you 4 or 5 hours to get through customs coming back. So back in the day when they had trucks coming and so forth, it could be 8, 12, 24 hours just to get across the border. So the Port of San Diego built the second entry port for commercial crossing. So we went down there, had a look around, look at all those trucks lined up to cross the border. And factories that are just on the other side, as we drove along the border there, the factories on the other side, a lot of them had Chinese lettering on the factory. So what was happening? Chinese manufacturers are buying factories in Mexico, right, for a couple of reasons. One is if they produce products that are the growth or manufacture of Mexico, they have Mexican raw materials, Mexican labor, it becomes country of origin Mexico. So the product is labeled made in Mexico or assembled in Mexico, some cases, and brought across the border under USMCA, which is the treaty between the US, Mexico, and Canada, duty-free. So we had China tariffs at 25%. If I move my manufacturing to Mexico, currently under USMCA, there is no duty, right? As long as you meet the requirements, you can bring that stuff into the US duty-free. So here you have Mexico with a low-cost labor environment. Remember, I showed you they were one of the three on the bottom end of cost of labor. Along the border, it's a little higher, but in central Mexico, cheaper. You've got duty-free entry into the United States, got proximity to markets. There are all kinds of good reasons for considering Mexico. And that is exactly what's happening. This is the port of Laredo. So we also went and visited Laredo, which is a little small town in Texas. You know, there's a song about it. It's not a big metropolitan area. It's a fairly small border town. It was, you know, I've seen a lot of things in my career. This was astonishing. They told us they processed 14,000 trucks per day. 14,000 trucks per day. And I said, are you sure? You sure you don't mean per month or per week? No, 14,000 trucks per day across the border at Laredo. Okay. And the way they do that is they are fully automated. The truck drivers approach the border, especially going south. It's more automated going south into Mexico. They approach the border. The loads have already been uploaded in terms of the data on what's in that load. They drive at about 20 miles an hour and they go through this technology corridor. It scans the barcode on the trailer and on the tractor. It does facial recognition of the driver. It uses LiDAR technology to determine what's inside the trailer and make sure there's no human beings, or so they can see inside what the parts are going across the border. And if everything matches up, they get a green light and they keep on moving. They never stop. They just move right through it. I mean, we stood on the international bridge and watched for about an hour. I was astounded. I've never seen anything like it. It was really amazing. So what has happened because of this technology, because of the growth of manufacturing in Mexico from Asia into Mexico, the growth is just astounding. They told us that the port had grown by 238% in 2023. That's a lot. That's a lot to handle. So we're seeing this trend. Now, if that 25% is imposed by the US government on Mexico tomorrow, which is the date it's supposed to be imposed, we may see that slow down a little bit. But by and large, we're seeing a big growth in that area, particularly in the automotive market. So when you're down there, you can see Mercedes-Benz is there, Tesla is there, BMW is there. They're all bringing or manufacturing parts of their cars in Mexico for either finishing in the US or for export to other countries. Claudia Sheinbaum is the new president of Mexico. She was elected and put in place in October. And she's a protege of the previous president, who was kind of soft on crime, I guess I would say. And so it's sort of unknown if she's going to really respond to the Trump administration demands to put more emphasis on crime at the border or not. But it looks like she's responding. So it was so interesting. that she was the first to stand up to Trump and said, you know, if you put tariffs on us, we're going to put tariffs on you. And that's a real problem for the US, especially because about, I think 80% of our fruits and vegetables come from Mexico. And if we get that tariff, guess what happens? Right? If we get a 25% tariff, it's going to be way more expensive to buy food. Okay. All right. So she's somebody to watch and to listen for. She's an environmental engineer by training. I think she has a PhD in environmental engineering. So we're likely to see more emphasis put on the environment. Okay, so if you're leaving a foreign country, how am I doing on time? Anybody? How much time do I have? Okay, I'm okay. All right, so if you're leaving a foreign country, particularly China, it's a lot harder than you think. So you can't just shut the factory down, lock the doors, get on a plane, come home. It's not that easy. So first of all, most employees in China are on employment contracts. So when they go to work at a factory, they sign a contract for 1 year or 2 years. And that means if you close a factory, you have to pay out the factory worker to the end of the contract. That's a surprise to a lot of my clients. They're like, well, we're going to move from China. I'm like, really? You know how expensive it's going to be if you have 200 workers and you got to pay them for 2 years wages before you leave? They're really expensive, could be, and you need to consider that before you leave. You also often need permits to leave. There's a wait time. If the Chinese government thinks it's a technology they want to keep in China, you could wait as much as 2 years for a permit to leave. If you have tools, dies, and molds that you've given to a Chinese factory, you ain't never getting those back. You know, it may have your name on it. In your contract, it may say you own them. But once they're in the Chinese factory, they're considered part of the infrastructure and cannot be exported. The other thing is the Chinese government won't allow exports of used goods. And so you're stuck leaving or writing off machine tools and other things that you may have lent to the Chinese manufacturer. Okay, your IP, I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. This is our buddy, Chuck Starnes, and Chuck was making medical consumables. So the stuff that's used in hospitals that you throw away, like tubing and needles and injections and stuff that's thrown away after it's used. And he figured out that it'd be cheaper to move to India and to manufacture these goods in India. And so he decided he was going to close down the factory. He announces, you know, he starts packing up stuff and announces he's closing down the factory in China. And the Chinese employees captured him and kept him prisoner for 2 weeks in his office. So they fed him and everything. They weren't torturing him, but they wouldn't let him out of his office for 2 weeks. And the only way he got out was he figured out, he kept calling. And of course, the police in China don't address these kind of issues. The police in China are there to enforce the laws of the government. They're not there to keep the peace like in the US, where they would come and try to resolve an issue. They just ignored him. And so he finally found a NBC news crew that was in China reporting, got a hold of them and asked them to come to the factory. And that's where this picture came from. And eventually the Chinese employees allowed him to leave if he agreed to pay out their salaries for 2 years. So that's what he had to do to leave China. So you also need permits to leave, as I mentioned before. Sometimes that takes an inordinate amount of time. You never want to announce in advance that you're leaving China, because the employees are then going to say, well, what strategy do I have to keep you here? Do I capture you? Do I kidnap you? Put you in your office for 2 weeks? I mean, what are my strategies? So you don't want to announce this in advance. You need to do some planning in secret, essentially, if you plan to leave. This is a picture I took of a factory that was making athletic shoes. Those women there, usually when you visit a factory, they keep their heads down. They don't like to have their picture taken. But she happened to look up when I was there and I got this picture. I was excited about that. Just think they're sitting on these plastic chairs for 10 hours a day, sewing, you know, assembling products. It was pretty amazing. Athletic shoes are very high labor content. If you turn over your athletic shoe, you can see those little squares on the bottom. Sometimes they're different colors and so forth. Those are all individually glued by hand. Then they go through a heat treat process, so they sort of meld together. Okay, lots and lots of labor. You sew the uppers, they get molded together. It's, you know, it's just lots and lots of labor. You have taught your factory how to make your product. You taught them what the quality standards are. They know who your suppliers are. They know what your blueprints look like and your schematics for manufacturing. So if you up and leave the factory, think the factory workers and the management are going to just forget how to make your product? No. They're going to come to work the next day and continue to make your product and sell it under a different brand name. So you find yourself, and I have clients like this, find themselves competing on the world market with their own products made from the same factory they just left. You have to protect your intellectual property, and there's some different ways that we've helped companies do that. Okay, who owns your tools, dies, and molds? We already talked about this. This is a toy factory making plastic toys that I visited in China. And they had machine tools that were shipped from the US to make these molded toys. So who owns those if you decide to leave? Probably not you. So you have to be very careful about ending a supplier contract. You have to know whether it's a manufacturing site, a contract manufacturer, or simply a supplier of parts. You need to be very, very careful and know what you're doing before you end it. So you shouldn't just go out and announce 6 months in advance, we're going to move to another location, another supplier, bring stuff back to the US, because you're going to find there's a lot of sabotage that goes on in the meantime. Redeveloping your supply base in the US, we generally tell our clients it'll take you about 18 months to develop your suppliers in the US, because 25 years ago, when your production moved to China, so did all your suppliers. So you have to redevelop those suppliers. A lot of times they don't make the same products anymore. They've moved on. They don't have the skills. They don't have the manpower. So redeveloping all of that takes about 18 months. Here's the checklist for leaving China. These are some things that you need to look at all times. I think we've been through this. The most important thing is to plan and make sure you're working with somebody who knows how to do this. So either an attorney or a consultant or someone that's done this process before, so that you don't get stuck with a lot of extra fees or, shut down or quality issues or whatever. I mean, you really need to be able to plan for all of this in advance. Lots of change ahead. Stay tuned even for tomorrow to see what the Trump administration does. You know, one of the worst things in business is unpredictability. So when a business can't determine what's going to happen next, or how to plan their production next, or how to respond to the environment next, it's chaos. And that's exactly the state that we're in. The Trump administration has tariffs on, tariffs off, tariffs on, tariffs off. And that makes it really difficult for businesses to determine what to do and how to move forward. So stay tuned for that change ahead. My advice is to always be flexible in a manufacturing environment or in any business environment, and have alternate plans developed in case the environment changes. So thank you for listening to me today. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have a question. And I would encourage you all to look at our website. It's reshoringinstitute.org. As I said, we're a nonprofit, but we publish everything, all of our surveys, all of our white papers. In fact, we have a white paper that just came out. We're publicizing it tomorrow on minimum wages across the US and how that affects where you locate a factory. But we have surveys like that. We have, international wage surveys. There's all kinds of white papers and case studies and so forth on the website. So have a visit, look around and see what information is there and how it's useful. Okay, thank you for listening to me. I'll take questions. Anybody? Nobody has any questions? Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Can you say that again? Is there a microphone? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. What advice will you give the companies looking to like future-proof their supply chains amid going on these disruptions?
Yeah, the advice that I give our companies now, our clients now, is to have alternate plans. So you need to have an idea of what direction you want to go, but also have a plan B and a plan C in case it doesn't work out. And that's, that was kind of on the back burner, I think, in years past. But right now, we just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We just don't know. And so you need to be prepared and flexible enough by having thought through what those plans are. And by that, I mean, is it a different location? Are you going to have a different strategy? Are you going to try moving stuff to a different, to Mexico? Are you going to try to develop more domestic suppliers? I mean, all these things should be part of those plans so that when something happens, you can pivot to those plans. I mean, most companies got really, really caught during the pandemic. So in February of 2020, I was at Purdue University in Indiana speaking at a conference. There were about 200 people at this conference. And because I'm connected to China, I knew that there was going to be a big issue with COVID-19. And this is before we declared it was a pandemic. And I asked the audience, who's got a plan, an alternate plan, if this sickness changes your supply chain? No one in the audience had an alternate plan. By the next month, this was February 13th, 2020. By March 1st, we had declared a pandemic and all these factories in China were shut down, right? So for weeks, so people couldn't get supplies. They couldn't, in Korea, Hyundai was on a just-in-time or lean manufacturing approach. So they were bringing in parts from China to manufacture in Korea at Hyundai. And because their pipeline, they were practicing lean manufacturing, they had only the inventory in their pipeline. They had no extra inventory on hand. So when the factory shut down in China, they essentially had to shut down their factory in Korea, right? Even though, the pandemic didn't happen to Korea until a couple of weeks later. But they had to shut their factory down. So there was a big headline in a newspaper that said, you can't make an automobile with 3 wheels, right? So, I mean, they couldn't get parts. They just, it was awful. So companies were caught by surprise. And I think the result is they're rethinking their global strategies. They're building inventory so they don't have shortages like that. They're, determining alternate suppliers. There's all kinds of activity in supply chain right now. I mean, if you're studying supply chain, man, you are in a great position because right now there's a lot of changes, a lot of alternate things happening, a lot of dynamics going on in the industry. Anybody else?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. So my question is, how are companies leveraging digital tools such as AI and blockchain to enhance supply chain transparency and efficiency?
Yeah, so AI is definitely the next thing in supply chain. If you're studying supply chains, hopefully you have looked at AI or learning about AI as well. So what AI offers is, in a lot of cases, will help you develop alternate solutions. So you can say, I've got this problem. I have 20 parts, and right now they're sourced in China and Vietnam and so forth. What do I do if I can't get those sources? And AI can help you develop those kind of things, or alternate forecasts or alternate responses is really, really helpful. So AI is being built into most systems right now that manage supply chains. So for example, if you have SAP or Oracle, as used as your business system, AI is built into those functions and can give you suggestions and help you make better decisions based on those suggestions and alternatives. So yeah, it's really, really going to enhance supply chain decision-making over the next few years.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answers. My question is, what does research as an intern in Reshoring Institute look like?
I'm sorry, say it again.
What does research as an intern in Reshoring Institute look like?
The internships?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we take usually 1 or 2 interns per semester, and we put our interns to work working on our consulting projects, so they help us. Right now, we've got 2 interns, for example, that are working on a study we're doing for the state of New York, and they're doing background checks on all these companies, background research, and then they're assisting us with the interviews, writing up the notes and so forth. So a lot of exposure. The other thing, we have another intern that's at American University in Washington, D.C., and he's helping us with our research on Mexico. And so the internships are good. They're paid internships also. So if you're interested, reach out to me and, we'll add you to the list. I don't know exactly when we might be taking additional interns, but we do from time to time. We'd be happy to talk to you. Okay.
Thank you.
By the way, our internships are all remote. So everybody's doing work on their own. You don't have to be anywhere, and you do it on your own time. So we always tell our students your education comes first. You go to class first, and then you can work for us in the evening or afternoon or on the weekends.
I deeply appreciate all the answers. I was wondering what kind of internship you offer.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. So our interns come to work for us. They either work on our consulting projects or they're doing research. We will ask for writing samples. So you have to be a good writer to work for us because we have so much writing. There's a lot of reports and research and stuff that's done that requires writing skills. So we do that. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, wraps it up. Thank you all very much. Yeah, I have a question.
Now I know we were looking at in terms of labor costs. So China obviously has been growing since probably like the 90s, 2000s. And I think you said India, Vietnam, and Malaysia. If you were to pick one country now that companies in the US, for example, were to target in terms of quote unquote cheap labor, which out of those countries do you think is the next booming market for manufacturing for American companies?
Well, a lot of stuff moved to Vietnam for sure. In the past 10 years or so. Problem with Vietnam is they only have 95 million people, which is fairly small, and their factories are full. Just try to find a factory in Vietnam. There's none available. So companies are looking to alternate locations. India, yes, except, like Apple has moved quite a bit of manufacturing to India. But India has some other problems. The infrastructure is not great. If you are sending container loads from India to the US West Coast ports, for example, takes 2 weeks longer than it does from China. So that means you've got investment in your inventory on the water for 2 additional weeks. And that often doesn't make economic sense. Plus, the bureaucracy is pretty onerous in India. There's a lot of reasons why it would be my second choice anyway when I'm advising clients. But companies like Apple, who sort of create their own cities, right? And they do their own manufacturing sites that are these huge, enormous sites, and engineer all of the processes around it to import and export. They're successful in doing that. So, but I would say the majority of manufacturers are going to struggle moving to India because of the environment. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. It's my pleasure.